Imagine standing in the heart of Andalusia in the 12th century, a land rich with culture, knowledge, and the flourishing of Islamic civilization. Now, picture a powerful force sweeping through this land, armed not only with swords, but with a message that would change the very fabric of society. What happens when faith becomes a weapon and the blade of a conqueror replaces the voice of a preacher? Welcome to the world of the Almohads, a dynasty that rose to prominence in the Maghreb and Spain during a turbulent time in Islamic history. But there's a question that looms large. Did the Almohads serve the cause of God, or did they impose tyranny in the name of faith? This is a complex and controversial chapter, one that has shaped the history of Spain and the Islamic world. Today, we explore this critical moment in history, not just to learn about the Almohads, but to reflect on the deeper implications of faith, power, and the role of force in religion. Were the forced conversions of Spain under their rule an act of divine duty or a tragic chapter of religious oppression? As we delve into the historical, philosophical, and theological aspects of this story, we'll explore what it means for us today. By the end of this video, you'll not only understand the events that unfolded in Spain during the time of the Almohads, but also reflect on the broader questions that echo in our world today. To understand the force behind the Almohads, we must first turn back to the early 12th century, a time when the Muslim world was at a crossroads. The Islamic Empire, though vast, was fractured by divisions, sectarian struggles, and political instability. The Almohad movement began in North Africa, founded by Abu Yaqub Yusuf, who sought to unify the Maghreb under a strict interpretation of Islam. His vision was one of purity and religious reform, which he believed had been diluted by the rival Berber dynasties and the corrupting influence of regional rulers. But what sparked the Almohad fire in the first place? It was the Murabitun dynasty, the previous rulers in the region, that had provided a semblance of unity but failed to address growing concerns over religious practices that deviated from the perceived teachings of the Quran and Hadith. The Almohads, inspired by the teachings of Ibn Tumart, a religious scholar who declared himself the Mahdi, a divinely guided leader, promoted a strict, reformist vision of Islam, one that rejected any form of innovation, bid'ah, and emphasized the supremacy of Tawheed, the oneness of God. In the early years, the Almohads did not seek to expand through force, but rather by challenging the established authorities with their religious zeal. They were driven by the belief that they were purifying Islam, ridding it of its corruptions. But as the movement gained momentum, they began to see their mission as one that required both spiritual and military action. This mindset would later fuel their conquests into the Iberian Peninsula. In 1147, after consolidating power in the Maghreb, the Almohads turned their attention to the Iberian Peninsula, where the Muslim-controlled territories of Al-Andalus were in disarray. Here, they faced a society that had lived through centuries of Muslim, Christian, and Jewish coexistence, what is often referred to as the convivencia. The Almohads, however, did not embrace this pluralism. Their arrival in Spain was marked by a radical shift toward a purer form of Islam, one that left little room for compromise. They saw themselves as the true defenders of Islam, and their military conquest was intertwined with their theological mission. But as the Almohads extended their influence, they implemented policies that would have profound consequences for the Muslims, Christians, and Jews of Spain. Forced conversions, expulsions, and the imposition of a stricter religious framework became central to their reign. But were these actions truly in line with the teachings of Islam? Or did the Almohads overstep the boundaries of faith, turning religious obligation into a tool of political power? To answer these questions, we must examine the ethical and theological principles behind forced conversion. According to Surah Al-Baqarah 2:256, there is no compulsion in religion. So, how could the Almohads justify such practices in the name of faith? And what does this say about the intersection of faith and power in the context of political conquest? The story of the Almohads raises fundamental questions. Can faith and power coexist without corruption? Was the sword wielded by the Almohads a tool of divine will, or was it the will of man, using faith as a mask for imperial ambition? The seeds of the Almohads' strict religious policies were sown by their founder, Ibn Tumart, a charismatic religious leader who declared himself the Mahdi, the divinely guided redeemer of Islam. Ibn Tumart's teachings emphasized a purist vision of the faith, one that rejected any innovation or deviation from the core tenets of the Quran and Hadith. Central to his vision was the idea that the Muslims of North Africa and Al-Andalus had strayed from the true path of Islam, succumbing to practices that he saw as bid'ah, innovation. Ibn Tumart's followers, the Almohads, believed that they were the chosen ones to return to the original purity of Islam, cleansed from the influence of local traditions, philosophy, and what they saw as the heretical practices of the time. Ibn Tumart's vision, though spiritual at its core, was intertwined with the political realities of the time. His call for reform wasn't just theological, but also deeply political, questioning the legitimacy of the established rulers and their governance. The movement sought not only to correct religious practices, but also to unify the region under one strict interpretation of Islam. Once the Almohads consolidated power, their primary goal was to purify the lands under their rule by eradicating what they considered religious deviance. This purity campaign led to the forced conversions of non-Muslims, as well as Muslims who did not adhere to their vision of Islam. While they justified this through their interpretation of the Quran and Hadith, their approach was starkly different from the message of tolerance and freedom of faith found in Islam. The arrival of the Almohads in Al-Andalus, Muslim Spain, marked a dramatic shift in policy. Prior to their invasion, Muslims in Spain had lived under a system of relative tolerance, with Muslims, Christians, and Jews coexisting in what is often romanticized as a period of religious pluralism known as the convivencia. Under the rule of the Umayyad Caliphate and subsequent dynasties, non-Muslims were allowed to practice their faith, provided they paid a special tax and generally enjoyed a degree of autonomy. The Almohads, however, rejected this pluralistic approach. The forced conversion of Jews and Christians became central to their policy. In 1165, after the Almohads took control of Seville, they demanded that the Jews either convert to Islam or face expulsion. The same ultimatum was extended to the Christian populations in the territories they controlled. Many Jews and Christians, in fear for their lives, chose to convert, but there was little true belief in their hearts. But did the Almohads believe that such forced conversions were truly in line with Islamic principles? According to Islamic teachings, conversion to Islam should be a matter of personal conviction. Surah Al-Baqarah 2:256 states, "There is no compulsion in religion," emphasizing that belief cannot be imposed through force. So, how did the Almohads justify their actions? One argument the Almohads used was the concept of religious unity. They believed that for the true unity of the Muslim community, the Ummah, there had to be a single, pure vision of Islam. This was especially significant in their campaign against the Muwallids, Muslims of Iberian descent who were seen as less devout than the Almohads, and in their crackdown on the Mozarabs, Christians living under Muslim rule who had adopted some Islamic customs but did not fully embrace the faith. For the Almohads, this unification of faith through conversion was seen as a religious duty, despite its coercive nature. The leadership of the Almohads is pivotal in understanding the scale of the conversions and their justification. The central figures driving this vision were not only Ibn Tumat, but also his successor Abu Yaqub Yusuf, and later Abu Yusuf Yaqub al-Mansur. Abu Yaqub Yusuf was instrumental in consolidating Almohad rule in both the Maghreb and Al-Andalus. Upon his conquest of Andalusia, he swiftly imposed the Almohad interpretation of Islam, which demanded religious conformity and uniformity. Under his leadership, the forced conversion of Christians and Jews in Spain became widespread. His successor, Abu Yusuf Yaqub al-Mansur, continued this policy with even more aggression, overseeing the implementation of strict religious laws and further marginalizing non-Muslims in Spain. This was a period marked by military conquest, as well as the tightening of the social, cultural, and religious fabric of the Andalusian Muslim world. The Almohad policy wasn't just about converting non-Muslims, it was about purging the land of any influence they deemed incompatible with their interpretation of Islam. This included even purging some of their own Muslim population, targeting those who did not fully align with the Almohad creed. These actions came with severe consequences for the multicultural society that had thrived in Al-Andalus for centuries. Yet, under the Almohads, we see a stark contradiction. The forced conversion of Jews, Christians, and even some Muslims, who were seen as insufficiently devoted to the Almohad vision, contradicted the very foundation of Islamic spirituality. These conversions were not motivated by personal conviction, but by fear of persecution and the threat of violence. The people who were forced to convert under the Almohad rule may have outwardly conformed to the new laws, but their hearts did not embrace the faith. This brings us to a powerful spiritual question. Does the sword, wielded in the name of God, truly serve His will? Can we say that the Almohads were serving the will of God if their actions undermined the very essence of faith, genuine belief? This dilemma is not just a question of history, it is a reflection on how we approach faith in our own lives today. We see that spirituality and force do not mix, and that forcing belief undermines the sanctity of personal connection to God. A believer's faith cannot be measured by their outward actions alone. As the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, taught, "Verily, actions are judged by intentions." Sahih Bukhari. This hadith reminds us that the true measure of faith is not found in external conformity, but in the sincerity of one's heart. The Almohads claimed to have divine authority to impose their version of Islam upon the people. However, who truly holds the authority to judge the faith of others? This is a critical question that cuts to the heart of religious governance and leadership. The Almohads believed they were the true purveyors of Islam, but in doing so, they ignored the profound teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who advocated for mercy, tolerance, and justice. In a famous hadith, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "Whoever kills a person under covenant, dhimmi, will not smell the fragrance of paradise." This highlights the immense responsibility placed upon those who govern and the grave consequences of violating the sanctity of human life, particularly when it comes to non-Muslims who live peacefully under Muslim rule. The Almohads, however, ignored this ethical directive. By implementing forced conversions, they went against the very principles of mercy, compassion, and justice that Islam holds dear. Rather than leading with kindness and the call of truth, they wielded power as a weapon, causing untold suffering and alienation. It's crucial to consider the moral consequences of the Almohads' actions. Forced conversion not only caused physical harm, but also spiritual alienation. The people who were converted out of fear often lived with deep internal conflict, torn between their true beliefs and the need for survival. The moral lesson here is clear. Faith must be an act of the heart, and when religion is used as a tool for coercion, it loses its transformative power. The events of the Almohad era also had profound consequences for the Muslim, Christian, and Jewish communities in Spain. The Muslim community in Spain, particularly the Muwallads and Mozarabs, found themselves caught in the crossfire of religious imposition. For the Almohads, religious purity meant that there could be no room for diverse interpretations of Islam. Those who did not conform to the strict interpretation were ostracized, persecuted, and forced to flee or face death. On the other hand, Christian and Jewish communities were not simply forced to abandon their faith, but they were marginalized and isolated from the broader society. The forced conversions created deep divisions within society, leading to a loss of the cultural richness and diversity that had previously characterized Al-Andalus. The Almohad policies ended the convivencia, turning what was once a model of coexistence into a place of tension and division. This raises a question for us today. What happens when we allow religious identity to be defined by conformity and power, rather than by shared values of mercy, justice, and respect? The lessons of Al-Andalus should be a reminder that while differences in belief are natural, they must not become the grounds for division and conflict. Islam, like all true religions, calls for compassion and understanding, not coercion and division. The Almohads' rule in Al-Andalus did not last long, but its effects were profound. After nearly a century of Almohad domination, the Muslim-controlled territories of Spain began to fracture. The forced conversions and the imposition of a narrow interpretation of Islam led to widespread alienation, not just among non-Muslims, but even within the Muslim community itself. The Muwallads and Mozarabs, who had once lived in relative peace with their Muslim rulers, found themselves increasingly marginalized and persecuted. What followed was the decline of the Almohads and the rise of the Christian Reconquista. By the late 13th century, Christian forces had recaptured much of the Iberian Peninsula, including Seville in 1248. The fall of Al-Andalus marked the end of nearly 8 centuries of Muslim rule in Spain, signaling a dramatic shift in both religious and cultural dynamics. The forced conversions under the Almohads ultimately contributed to the fragmentation of Muslim power in Spain, weakening the political and social cohesion that had once been a hallmark of the region. The legacy of the Almohads' coercive policies and the resulting collapse of Muslim Spain serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of mixing religion with authoritarian power. When religious authority is wielded by the sword, it often leads to division, strife, and the eventual erosion of the very faith that it aims to protect. The question of religious purity becomes less about spiritual growth and more about control, and what remains is not true faith, but an artificial conformity imposed from above. As we reflect on the historical significance of the Almohads, it is impossible not to draw parallels with some of the challenges we face in the modern world. Across different regions and eras, the idea of forcing religious conformity has resurfaced in various forms, often leading to social unrest and conflict. Whether it is the rise of extremist ideologies or the use of religion to justify political oppression, the dangers of coercion in the name of faith are ever present. Today, Some Muslim-majority countries face the dilemma of balancing religious authority with political power. The Almohad experience serves as a warning against the dangers of authoritarianism masquerading as religious purity. It reminds us that the true spirit of Islam, or any religion, cannot be maintained by force or coercion. It is in the heart of the believer, nurtured by knowledge, kindness, and freedom of thought. One key lesson from the Almohads is the importance of religious tolerance and pluralism. The idea that people of different faiths can coexist peacefully is not only an ideal, but a historical reality that existed during the early centuries of Islamic civilization. The early Islamic model of convivencia, particularly under the Umayyad Caliphate and later under various dynasties in Al-Andalus, showed that people of different faiths could live together in harmony, contributing to the cultural and intellectual flourishing of the region. However, the rise of the Almohads marked a shift away from this model. The harshness of their policies and the forced conversions led to a cultural and spiritual collapse. In the end, the fragmentation of Al-Andalus resulted not only in the political downfall of the Muslim state, but also in the loss of a vibrant cultural heritage that had been built on the principles of cooperation, mutual respect, and intellectual exchange. For Muslims today, the story of the Almohads provides an opportunity for deep reflection on how we approach issues of faith, governance, and diversity. The key lessons are: 1. Faith cannot be imposed. True belief comes from within. If we impose religion through force, we not only corrupt the faith itself, but also alienate others. 2. Tolerance is a cornerstone of Islam. Islam teaches respect for diversity. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, demonstrated tolerance in his treatment of Christians, Jews, and others, and his life serves as a model for peaceful coexistence. 3. The danger of mixing religion with power. The Almohads, in their quest to purify Islam, used force as a means to achieve political control. This ultimately led to division, conflict, and the collapse of their dynasty. Today, we must ensure that religious convictions are never used as a tool of political manipulation. The value of dialogue and understanding. The cultural and intellectual achievements of Al-Andalus, built on dialogue between Muslims, Christians, and Jews, were lost when this spirit of cooperation was replaced by rigid religious orthodoxy. Today, Muslims are called to uphold the spirit of dialogue and mutual understanding, both within the Muslim community and with others. The story of the Almohads is one of power, faith, and conflict, an exploration of how deeply religious convictions can be twisted by political ambition. But it also offers us important lessons about the core values of Islam, the dangers of coercion, and the importance of religious tolerance. As we move forward, we must carry these lessons with us, ensuring that the pursuit of faith remains one of freedom, respect, and sincerity. In reflecting on the legacy of the Almohads, we are reminded that the true strength of any faith lies not in the imposition of its practices through fear or force, but in the sincerity of belief and the kindness with which it is shared. The story of forced conversions in Spain under the Almohads challenges us to consider the ethics of how faith should be lived and practiced, urging us to remember the Quranic principle: there is no compulsion in religion. As we conclude this exploration, it is essential to carry forward the message of tolerance, peace, and mutual respect. The lesson from the Almohads is not just a historical one. It is a lesson that continues to resonate in the way we engage with our world today. Let us ensure that the faith we practice is one that comes from the heart and is shared with others through wisdom, compassion, and understanding. As we face challenges in our own time, let us remember the words of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who said, "The strong person is not the one who is able to overpower others, but the one who can control themselves when they are angry." Sahih Bukhari. May we, as Muslims, embody this strength of character, reflecting the true spirit of Islam in our words, actions, and in how we treat others. Thank you for watching, and may peace and blessings be upon you all.